Perhaps it's appropriate to begin with the cinematic forefather of breaking beyond frameworks, creating a new paradigm. Known for pushing the medium of cinema forward, Orson Welles' cinematic triumph Citizen Kane is perhaps one of the best examples of non-linear narrative structure. When it comes to screenplays, the principal thing to take away from Citizen Kane is its development of the non-chronological narrative.
Welcome to the Cinematography.
This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/cinemacartography. That's mubi.com/cinemacartography for a whole month of great cinema for free. Borrowing from the world of memory, mimicking its motions through flashbacks and glimpses of the past, and told from the perspective of multiple narrators as we piece together an impression of Charles Kane's life. In so many ways, it's a disruption of the classic character study. Citizen Kane tells the story of a man from the perspective of others, as the viewer tries to make sense of Kane's last words and the mysteries surrounding his life. Here, the narrators aren't omniscient, but rather they're unreliable, bound by the subjectivity of their own accounts.
Well, after the first couple of months, she and Charlie didn't see much of each other except at breakfast. It was a marriage just like any other marriage.
This choice allows for the construction of a complex narrative web that extends into the film's anachronic narrative order, following into a crescendo towards the end of the story. Welles' choice on showcasing this narrative in tableaus is precisely what makes it remarkable. We never get the chance to know the full truth about Charles Kane, as the film breaks between past and present, maintaining climactic tension, opting for sequences of moments from which we try to paint a bigger picture in order to bring a whole to the parts.
Well, Charles, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And a Happy New Year.
Here, Welles orchestrates an array of perspectives with a never-seen-before take in storytelling that spills into the visual splendours of the film. His use of deep focus photography helps to separate the character from its environment, elaborating on the scope and size of Kane's familial universe and serving as a narrative device in contrast with the shallow focus that often depict intimacy and proximity. Citizen Kane is an exaltation of storytelling, influential for the entire of cinema's being.
I don't think any word can explain a man's life. No, I guess Rosebud is just a piece in a jigsaw puzzle. A missing piece.
A notable spawn of Welles' influence came in Kurosawa's Rashōmon. Unlike no other, Rashōmon is a film interested in investigating what truth means in the context of justice. Yet this time, subjectivity is the drawing point of the film. Utilizing a series of witness accounts of a crime, the script transgresses the idea of cause and effect in order to reveal the complexities of human nature, as four people recount different versions of the same event. Here, Kurosawa uses flashbacks to cement into the flow of the storytelling the deep subjectivity dictated by its characters' perceptions, constructing a narrative that's both particular and universal. For what we learn in Rashōmon is that subjectivity allows every person to become the protagonist, and as viewers, we are inclined to filter things through our own perception. We watch four different accounts of the same story, and yet each account serves to grant the storyteller the archetype of hero. Storytelling in this sense is always mutually contradictory, for we must, when listening to a story, remember that it can never completely bypass ego, and showing the multitude of perspectives of this only shows how hopeless an endeavour that can truly be. In a completely different direction, The 1916 epic of the silent film era Intolerance by D.W. Griffith uses the narrative technique as an allegorical method concealed in itself. Covering a timeline of 2,500 years condensed in its 210 minutes, Intolerance utilises parallel narratives to intercut and overlap between stories as the film progresses. The constant transitions between timelines evoke a sense of familiarity between all eras. Griffith utilising strong archetypical characters as a way to showcase emblematic symbols of humanity. Here, all narrative techniques have their counterpart displayed through visual storytelling. Most remarkably, the crosscuts that contrast scenes within different timelines, allowing the audience to trace parallels between acts of intolerance throughout the ages. This is Griffith's way of displaying universality in artistic themes. He purposely chose epochs and cultures that couldn't be further from one another. However, if watching Intolerance were to teach us anything, it's that when it comes to a screenplay, we as viewers are looking for something to latch onto. We aim to find that which is familiar. Griffith succeeds in showing that telling varying stories can in many instances bring themselves together through the eyes of the spectator. Intolerance is not an esoteric and confused piece. All the stories are anchored by its thematics, reminded as we return time and time again to the mother cradling her baby. A gesture that perhaps all of our stories can find solace in universal truths. For Citizen Kane was not the first film to experiment with untraditional narratives. Fritz in his film Destiny took 3 separate stories to create a meditation on death and the sanctity of life. In this instance, 3 different lives are represented by 3 burning candles. And within this, a single narrative thread of a third party runs throughout all of them. We move from one story to another, having to experience each in its entirety as opposed to intercutting as was seen in Intolerance. Through this method, Fritz Lang shows that it can often be the whole of one story juxtaposed to another and another, that only then can we see the entirety of the message. An entire lifetime of purpose for one can just be a drop of influence to another, just one stepping stone on the path to the finale. These are but some films that push the limits of cinematic structure. Intolerance, Destiny, and Bergman's Wild Strawberries exercise narrative non-linearity in order to reach layers of storytelling that simply can't be done in traditional narrative formats. They reflect the non-linear ways in which we perceive the world, searching for allegories of the unconscious mind or the collective unconscious of humanity, moving out of our traditional confines of reality to hopefully gain greater understanding of our own stories.
Titta nu du blir I ansiktet. Försök att le. Där ja, ler du.
Det gör så ont.
Also searching to reconcile the human perception into script writing through much different means is Christopher Nolan's Memento. Memento deals with the issue of memory, constructing narratives that revolve around its main character's retrieval of the past. In Memento, Christopher Nolan structures the film in 2 timelines, one in colour and the other in black and white. This allows for a distinction of the 2 timelines as the story progresses into its climactic ending. This is the most glaring way in which a screenplay structure can be altered, for here, Nolan plays with the form itself. It's a film that essentially works in a 3-act structure, however it's a structure within a structure.
Remember Sammy Jankis?
I met Sammy through work.
If you were to map out its chronology, you would see that it starts at the ending, tells one half of the story backwards, one half of the story forwards, and then ends in the middle. It would initially sound like a gimmick, however, as we mentioned, the basis of screenwriting is telling a story however that story needs to be told.
Now, where was I?
Similarly, La Jetee by Chris Marker is another film that deals with memory, yet is constructed almost entirely of photo montages made from analog photography.
De ce dimanche, l'enfant dont nous racontons l'histoire devait revoir longtemps le soleil fixe, le décor planté au bout de la jetée, et un visage de femme.
As the film moves from past to the present, La Jetée creates continuity and ambience with the use of the soundscape. The story is told from the perspective of a narrator, and the film develops its own unique brand of chronology and conveyance as it does so by being nothing at all like what we would expect of a film. The use of photographs allows for a deep dive into the narrator's perceptions of the past, as the film also meditates on the mediums of film and memory, cutting and fading to and from places, wondering whether we're actually there or just remembering it. And ultimately, is there a difference between the two?
Comme en rêve, il lui montre un point hors de l'arbre. Il s'entend dire « Je viens de là ». Et il retombe à bout de force.
The inconsistencies of memory and perception are often topics of interest in non-linear stories. Akin to this tendency is Hiroshima, Mon Amour by Alain Resnais.
Quelle lenteur tout à coup. Quelle douceur. Tu ne peux pas savoir. Tu me tues.
Resnais created an audacious and unconventional narrative structure that relies on flashbacks and time shifts as a mean to explore and convey the fragmentation of two people's psyche through the effective memory of their brief encounter in post-war Hiroshima.
Écoute, je sais tout. Ça a continué.
Rien. Tu ne sais rien.
Here, the personal memory of their love story is intertwined with the collective memory of war. By juxtaposing and cutting between historical footage and the fictional footage of its characters, Hiroshima Mon Amour re-signified what it means to tell a love story, arguing the point that to be human is to be two things simultaneously, for we are always an individual part of the whole. But what if we were to take this idea and extrapolate it to its most extreme degree? Close Up by Abbas Kiarostami takes the notion of cinematic narrative and creates something where the real manifests as complete abstraction within cinematic reality.
من مجله را شاید که خوندم. یک اطلاعات بیشتری راجع به اون چیزی که توی مجله نوشته شده می‌خواستم.
Part fiction and part documentary, Close Up tells the real story of a man who, in order to impress strangers, impersonated the real Iranian filmmaker Moshe Makhmalbaf. We see documentary footage of the court hearing, filmed by Kiarostami himself. All the while, this real-life event is intercut with reenactments of the scenario in question by the same people involved, playing themselves.
از امروز کاری به فردا ممان. چه دانی که فردا چه زاید زمان. من فکر نکنم 10 دقیقه انسان 10 دقیقه بعدش رو انسان بفهمه که چی پیش میاد. پس این فرصتی که به دست داده من فکر کنم باید مغتنم بشمارم. ازش
Kiarostami takes information unfiltered through the real-life documentary and supplements it with offering a more objective view via the reenactments. Typically, we would envision the documentary to be the objective view, yet here, the interlacing of fiction and non-fiction, the self and the persona, even art and the real, all blur into one. Upon rewatches, we learn that it doesn't matter if scenes are rehearsed reenacted, or real, for in a cinematic structure, they all serve the same purpose. Our closed viewpoints often hinder a real truth, if such a thing could ever be displayed in cinema, and it's in close-up that if anything, what we see as more real is downplayed to highlight the artifice that cinema brings, and what we're left with is a lyrical sweeping through perspectives that delivers just as much importance as the minutiae found in the poetic modesty of the everyday. We can view the screenplay as the anchor of the cinematic craft, the thing that will keep us attached to the material while giving us the freedom to play in the abstract. And speaking of being held securely, perhaps a screenplay only needs one faint idea or moment to hold everything together. For instance, in Amores Perros, we have what could be seen as 3 separate short films back to back, if it weren't for the fact that all stories have one very loose connection: a car crash. Alejandro González Iñárritu's debut feature is a triptych piece, exposing non-linearity in its grandest sense. The most obvious connection to this postmodernist structure is of course Pulp Fiction, a film that brought to the mainstream the unimportance of finite storytelling in cinema.
Look, my friend, this is just where you and I differ.
Garçon! Coffee!
Jules, look, what happened this morning?
It was as though story could not be as reflective of the modern world. Meaning became quashed, as the self-awareness and intricacies of people were too great to find any sort of causal connection, for most things are fortuitous.
It's good to see you, I must go, I know I'm a good run. Anyway, my eyes are not accustomed.
As is in Amores Perros, a single event brings 3 different people, some directly involved to the incident and some indirectly involved, to form some kind of connection. What makes the narrative of Amores Perros so intriguing is that in many instances, it's purposefully incomplete. The initial binding force that brings the 3 stories together is in itself a very loose connection, and within each of the stories, we find that they too have their own voids. We see the car crash a total of 4 times within the film as we follow the 3 storylines, and as a spectator, we wait in anticipation for something to unite this puzzle, yet nothing finite emerges. As we progress through the story, the car crash is viewed from another perspective, which allows us something new to understand the whole of the story, but never with any finality. If anything, we could continue to add on infinite perspectives from the crash, and we would learn more, yet still be as far away from an answer as we were at the beginning. The structure of Amores Perros is fractured because the very thing it discusses is fractured itself. The intricacies that make up a society, when examined on their own, are incomprehensible. However, delving further, you may find that only through serendipity, another perspective actually filled in that gap you had before. Yet you've also found a new line of questions. It requires a total objectivity, a goal unachievable. These feeble storylines emphasize the fragility of life. We can look for purpose through causality, yet at the same time, it can be one unexplainable event that can change everything. But is it possible that script requires even less than that? Is it possible that cinema is its own unique realm, and so the written word takes on its own rules when placed in the world of the cinematic? A film such as Louis Buñuel's The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie is a consortium of film genres, yet it's in the structure of the very film itself that the true transgression lies.
Et pour montrer votre valeur, vous avez invité à dîner avec vous le spectre du commandeur.
Et pour montrer votre valeur, vous avez invité à dîner avec vous.
The film is about a gathering of friends at a dinner party and their inability to complete the party due to being constantly interrupted. Yet these are no ordinary interruptions. Whether we are in a dream, a parody of the film itself, we're never told which is which. Yet the complacency of the characters is what allows each sudden disruption of the narrative to take the film onto its next course.
Mesdames, Messieurs, bonsoir. Veuillez nous excuser.
A film such as The Discreet Charm is a perfect indicator for the freedom that film has in its structure. Things can change at the drop of a hat, and to take that sudden shattering of the established rules can just make what it is that's being said all the stronger. As we see demonstrated in Wong Kar-Wai's masterpiece, Chungking Express. Possibly the largest and most divergent instance of a narrative shift that we will mention, Chungking Express tells two stories, one directly after the other. These two stories do not feature the same characters, nor do they have any meaningful connections, other than one of the characters bumps into another at the point where the narrative focus changes.
我跟他最接近的时候，我们之间的距离只有0.01公分，我对他一无所知。
Story number 1 follows a police officer struggling to move on in life after being dumped by his girlfriend. He encounters another woman, a drug dealer. Their two paths crossing, but the possibility of their lives fusing together seeming almost impossible. It's at this point when the cop returns to his regular food joint that the first story jarringly ends and the next one begins. Story number 2 again focuses on a cop and the waitress's hidden infatuation with him. Chungking Express is a story about love, and in the film's search for it, there's a sudden revelation that in the inevitability of love never being found in the first story, it decides to look elsewhere. And it's in this second charming tale that the film stays until it closes. Here we see film being able to dissect itself in two, even to the point of self-interruption, realizing that it's not down this path that we needed to travel, and it's okay to steer course. By exploring the infinite space of possibilities in film, in this instance through its very structure, we can maneuver from the melancholy of isolation and discover a newfound intimacy. With this, we can learn that the labyrinth created from an involved screenplay can be the basis for the narrative itself. Charlie Kaufman has founded his art on intricate screenwriting, where the basis of what reality is often thrust on the forefront.
I like it, I do. I'm just really concerned about dying in the fire.
It's a big decision how one prefers to die.
Shown for how fickle such a thing is in the world of cinema, his creative process often is self-referential dialogue with the spectator, incorporating elements of being the artist behind the work and simultaneously part of the work itself, as well as the ever-torturous perspective of celebrating a postmodern style of writing and the paradox of wanting everything to have a purpose.
Sir, what if a writer is attempting to create a story where nothing much happens, where people don't change, they don't have any epiphanies, they struggle and are frustrated and nothing is resolved? More a reflection of the real world.
The real world?
Yes, sir.
Yet it is possible to maintain breaking the linearity of cinema and still creating an individualistic narrative. Shane Carruth's Primer demonstrates a perfect balance of both narrative fluidity and comprehensive screenwriting technique. While the film does experience its own unique brand of storytelling chronology, it could only be achieved by upheaving traditional story structure and simultaneously having a perfectionist control over the narrative threads. In Primer, differing timelines occur, sometimes before, sometimes after, and sometimes simultaneous to the events on screen. We move in all possible directions while hurtling towards the finale of the film.
It travels forward normally towards the B end, and when it gets there, the feed runs down parabolically until it's just stopped, but it doesn't. It curves back around towards the A end. And when it gets back to the A end, now curve that around. Okay, now the Weeble has experienced a total of 2 minutes. And again, it curves
back around. It curves parabolically.
Right.
For it's through the destruction of traditional chronology that the film is capable of developing its own unique form of escalation. Becoming convoluted and overwhelmed is ultimately what Primer is all about. It's one of the few instances wherein a film can't be completely experienced upon a single viewing for the sheer scope of its narrative. Primer is a perfect example to show that script remains not only an instinctive art form, but an intellectual craft.
How? Abe would ask. And Aaron would describe how simple things become. When you know precisely what someone will have for breakfast, even in a world of tamper-proof lids.
We recognise the adaptability of varying timelines from Primer as the same merging of dreams and reality in Satoshi Kon's Paprika. Satoshi Kon is an auteur of the art of animation, finding creative ways to dwell on issues of hyperreality through exploring the very pores of filmic language, ways that can only be done through animation, bringing to the forefront the permeability of the field of storytelling. We can jump from one character to another, yet do so all in the same breath. But we don't have to stray too far from the commonplace canon of cinema to discover instances wherein we've examined the standards of cinematic storytelling and re-evaluated its limitations. In The Godfather Part 2, what we find is a film that is part sequel and part prequel. By this point, there's no mysterious factor in the previous life of Vito Corleone. We already know he was a family man, and the manner in which he was able to build his life in the United States. Yet that is not the true purpose of its inclusion. By displaying Vito's life alongside his son's, we develop a parallel type of storytelling, one in which greater depth is added to the tragedy that is Michael Corleone. Both storylines develop in tandem to one another. We often take large periods away from each to focus on the other. In reality, although the film is about Michael, the structure of the film is telling us that it's about far more. In fact, it is in equal parts about the father as it is the son. Only over time do we come to realise that the simplicity to which Vito's story is told, and the fact that it never truly concludes in the film, makes it in many ways eternal.
Mike, say goodbye.
The legacy of Vito is able to continue even after his death. However, the film ensures that the final image we see is that of Michael, alone and old. He hasn't been granted the courtesy to be immortalised in time by the film's storytelling. The film is in fact punishing him. Every story has two sides, and The Godfather Part 2 demonstrates this very duality of storytelling. For we can visualise so much more of a tale when we're granted the ability to compare it to its diametric opposite. The screenplay can be seen as the cornerstone of cinema, the hidden art form that without it, film would collapse in on itself. Much like editing, we can argue that the greatest type of writing is that which goes unnoticed. The art of writing is very much like weaving an invisible thread, and it's certainly much easier to celebrate instances wherein artists are able to break out of the guidelines, norms, and constraints. However, it's only in their perfection of those rules and standards that they're able to do so, illuminating the new paths and possibilities for the art of screenwriting and the entirety of cinema. We'd like to thank Mubi for sponsoring this video. Mubi is a curated streaming service, an ever-changing collection of hand-picked films from new directors to award winners from everywhere on earth. Beautiful, interesting, incredible movies, and a new one every single day, always chosen by Mubi curators. You can stream or download all of Mubi's movies anytime, on any screen, any device, anywhere, and you'll never see a single ad on Mubi. Right now on Mubi, you can check out the brand new Yorgos Lanthimos film, Nimic, as well as dozens of more brand new releases exclusive to Mubi. You can try Mubi for free for 30 days at mubi.com/cinemacartography. That's mubi.com/cinemacartography for a whole month of great cinema for free.